Hello, and welcome to today's panel on transforming in-store shopper experience, hosted by George Mason University Center for Retail Transformation and sponsored by Microsoft. My name is Dr. Gautam Vadkepat. I'm an associate professor, a dean scholar, and the director for the Center for Retail Transformation. As part of our efforts to highlight transformation of retail to current and future retailers, I'm delighted to host this roundtable on shopper experience, where we'll hear from 4 leading experts in the space on challenges, opportunities, and solutions to delivering a remarkable in-store experience. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Please put your questions in the Q&A session so that we can answer the questions as they arise. And again, thank you to the audience for joining us today and for our panelists for making time to join us. Without further ado, let's meet our wonderful panelists who have so graciously made time to participate in the panel and share their experiences and expertise. Maybe we'll go around the room alphabetically. Andrew, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Gautam, and hello, everybody. My name is Andy Lodato. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at The Vitamin Shoppe, which is a health and wellness retailer primarily in the United States. At The Vitamin Shoppe, I oversee our digital commerce business, our supply chain, technology, and the quality and commercialization of our private brand.
Nice to meet you. Welcome, Andy. Thank you. John, you want to?
Thanks, Gautam. Yeah, John Gomez here, president of Cooler Screens. We're an in-store retail media platform. I help, my background is all things retail. Most recently, CEO of Cardenas Markets. It's a Hispanic-themed retail chain in the southwestern U.S. And previous to that, as EVP of Marketing, Merchandising, and Operations at Trader Joe's. And so I come to Cooler Screens just helping bring to life a lot of what the great things that e-commerce has brought to the engagement of consumers and bringing that to the in-store retail experience. So nice to be with you all.
Nice to be here. Retail media is a hot thing these days, so look forward to this discussion. Ricardo.
Thanks, Gautam. Pleasure to be here with this great panel. So I'm Ricardo Belmar. I've been in the retail tech space for the past 2 decades, working with retailers to help maximize the value of technology investments. I've worked with solutions from digital signage to managed Wi-Fi to network and data security, solutions that empower store associates, and other software applications that kind of help control consistent performance of all the various store systems that operate in the store, as well as in the back-end software solutions. So anything ranging from performance of point of sale to order management solutions and things of that sort. I'm currently the lead partner marketing advisor for retail and consumer goods at Microsoft, where I get to work with amazing partners, for example, like Cooler Screens, and find ways for us to co-market their solutions with Microsoft. So I'm also pretty active, as many of the folks here on the panel know, in social media and other mediums, which I like to call being a professional observer of the industry of sorts. So things like podcasting and other mediums as well.
Yeah, welcome, Ricardo. And I think that was the understatement of the decade. Trevor, last but not the least, saving the best for last.
Thank you. I'm Trevor Sumner, and I'm just I'm just tagged on Ricardo's LinkedIn posts. That's probably my primary claim to fame. No, I'm the CEO of Perch. What we do is interactive touchscreens at the shelf. And what's cool about them is they use computer vision to detect which products you touch so that they can wake up and tell you about the products. We think that much of digital signage is like the banner ad of retail. It's interruptive, it's blinky text. It's not helpful. We believe in a world where digital complements the shopping experience, and online you can click on a product to get more information. We want to do that in store and instrument the clicks at retail so we can actually decide what content actually complements the shopper journey and helps you understand the products, convert, and sell more.
Yeah, you're providing information at the point of sale, which is really important in the conversion. Well, thank you all for making time once again. And so without further ado, let's get started. Just as an icebreaker of sorts, let's talk about this notion, right? 86%, 85% of retail comes through physical stores, but there's still some conversation about quote unquote the demise of retail. I'm not going to use the other word. So let's just go around the room, retailers first, kind of, to get the perspective of what is the role of the store in a retailer's strategy, not just today, but put on your forward-thinking hat and in the future. So just give a couple of minutes, your perspectives, and Andy, if you don't mind kicking us off again.
Yeah, I'll start by paraphrasing Mark Twain. The demise of the store is greatly exaggerated. So no, stores are here to stay, an essential part of an integrated retail strategy. I will say that a non-integrated, non-digital, disconnected store really is at risk of becoming extinct. And so stores are key, but it's the integrated digital store that we're talking about.
That's fantastic. And we'll talk about the integrated store in a later part of the section, but thank you. John?
Yeah, I think sometimes, and probably over the recent few years, when people talk about omni-channel, they're pretty much talking about how do we get out of, the retail or shift retail into e-commerce. I think more and more, retailers are realizing that omni really means omni, and you've got to have a great retail strategy. You've got to have a great e-commerce strategy. And they all have to really work together and help each other. I think that there's actually an article this morning, I think in the Journal, if I'm not mistaken, that talked about how consumers, because of a combination of inflation, just the realities of being able to move around more, are actually shopping more in stores than they did last year. And so I think that there's a reality there that I think all things, all things being said, there's a great place for retail stores, and then there's also a complement to that from an e-commerce standpoint that I think any successful company really should be playing in both of those fields.
Wonderful. Ricardo?
Yeah, I think we may end up all saying very similar things, right, on this panel, because just to kind of reinforce, clearly stores aren't going away. I don't think there was ever a scenario where stores are going to completely go away or be taken over by e-commerce. But I think the most important point, really, that maybe 2 points, is that it's that stores are, as Andy said, right, they're part of an overall strategy. I don't think it's fair to say that any one of these channels that we might talk about, whether it's e-commerce, mobile stores, is going to be more important than another necessarily. It's really how you integrate them into your brand engagement with the consumer that matters, because consumers today, right, they move from one channel to another. So at the end of the day, the channel itself really isn't what matters. What matters is what's the experience you're delivering to that customer. And I would say when it comes to stores, what's really happening is that the purpose of the store in that integrated strategy is what's changing and evolving. So stores used to just be about displaying products, right, making them available for customers to obtain that product. And that still is a factor, right? We call that discovery these days, about discovering products. Sometimes it's discovering new products in a given category. Sometimes the store is really there to help promote advertising, because you got to be promotional about in certain categories. Sometimes the store is a distribution hub, right? Whether the customer is coming to the store to pick up the product or not, you might be fulfilling orders from that store inventory. So it's maybe not a direct customer engagement mode in that sentence, but it's still part of that integrated strategy. So I think the main point there really is, how are you evolving stores to meet changing consumer experiences?
Fantastic. Trevor, it's hard act to follow now with all these comments.
Oh, no. It's an easy act to follow, because these experienced gentlemen are very measured in their statements. Even the way Ricardo talks about the store, it's like, well, it'll be part of the strategy. It's 86% of the sales. It is the dominant form of profitability, right? People who buy online and in store spend 6 times as much, right? Like this whole notion that I always feel like we have to be very measured in our defense of stores, right? It's a $4.4 trillion market. It grows every single year. It was flat in a pandemic when people literally had to risk their lives to go shop in store, right? And it's not just, bigger than last year. It's bigger than 2019 in the pre-pandemic. So here's the dirty little secret. Like e-commerce is like a buying layer. It's like an easy thing. If I know what to buy, I can buy it. Sometimes it's convenient. Often it's just not economical. If you order delivery from grocery on Instacart, it costs $20. But here's the thing. The consumer only wants to pay $7. It just doesn't work, right? all the profitability is really driven in stores. You're seeing all the D2C companies go towards in-store. In-store is actually growing more on a percentage basis than e-commerce for the last 3 quarters and the first time since I think 2002. So I'm way in the other direction on here, right? It's where loyalty comes in. It's where brand comes in. It's where profitability comes in. Return rates are 3 times lower. It's, we need to be more aggressive. Now, the challenge with stores is it's operationally complex. It's super difficult. Easy to put up a website, send some stuff in the mail, hard to scale a store strategy. And so that's why people start with e-commerce. It's easier to get off the ground. And that's why you see all these D2Cs move to stores. Stores is where the meaningful aspect of the market is. And so the question is, okay, great. Now what? How do we transform the stores to be more than the origin of their term, storage of products? And that's the exciting part.
Excellent. So that's a perfect segue. I could not have asked for a better segue into the next section, which is the first of our meaty conversation, which is like, what are the challenges to delivering like a shopper, consistent, superior shopper experience? I'm going to put on my academic hat for just a quick second. As a faculty, we teach students about this paradigm that's called expectation confirmation paradigm. You have expectations about a certain level of service, experience, so forth. And if you meet it, then you're able to surpass it. You're able to delight the consumer. And if you don't, you lead to a dissatisfied customer. So I'm posing this, I'm saying all this to kind of pose the question, is delivering consistent shopper experience about managing expectations? That's just a straw man that I'm throwing out there to get your viewpoints on what are the true challenges in ensuring a consistent shopper experience. And again, we'll start off with Andy, and then, in our little video trailer, we had Trevor also talk about the same issue. So we'll get Andy, Trevor, and then we'll go to John and Ricardo. That's okay.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So things go very quickly from innovation to expectation. So I remember years ago, I was running IT at a retailer, and we put in electronic email receipts from store POS. And I was really proud of it. It took some effort. I went home and discussed this with my 16-year-old daughter at dinner. And her comment was, "Oh, you didn't already have that?" Right? She was not impressed that we had some new innovation because it already existed somewhere else. And so people's expectations of a store come from their best experiences. So they may say that their best experiences at the Apple store, or they got the best service at Nordstrom, or they got the best speed from Amazon, right? So all those things are what drive customer expectations. Sometimes I don't think it's fair that, these are there, but that's the facts that if people experience something good somewhere, then it becomes their expectation for every retailer.
That's a fantastic point, a really good point. And Trevor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I always find it's always complicated to talk about retail as if it's all one thing, right? Like your experience at Gucci or Chanel is much different than the experience at Vitamin Shop or a Target, right? And so expectations, at a Target or a grocery store is, I hope, all the products are there. And that there isn't a long line at the shopping at the checkout line, right? And the experience at Gucci is that there's this giant experience. They welcome me. Hopefully, I land a glass of prosecco as part of the shopping process, right? And so expectations are dependent on what your brand is. And I think this is where it goes to the meaty part. Whether it's the grocery store or Gucci, consistency is hard. Think about all those employees, right? For the Gucci side, how do you get people to that really excellent level of customer service? And then at the grocery, the Target, or the Vitamin Shop, like, how do you train people who are making closer to minimum wage, who may not have an experience in retail, where we see that there's a ton of churn just based upon the retail industry. And so consistency is not just assortment and blocking and tackling to make sure the products are on the shelves, but it's making sure the staff is properly trained. And then increasingly, customers realize that they're better educated on a lot of these products. So over 2/3 of customers think they know more about the products than the sales associates, at least in mass retail. And that's because they have access to Google, right? They have access to ratings, reviews, and videos. And so, I'm of the belief that what we need to do to create that level of consistency is to depend a little less on the sales associate and provide those shopping tools in a guided, assisted mode with the sales associate or in a self-directed mode. I mean, if you think about it, it's just phenomenally odd that the one place you can't get digital content about all the products that are on the shelf are in the store where 86% of transactions occur. And so we've got to find a way to close that gap, whether it's through mobile apps, through digital signage, through what we're doing at Perch, and then allow people to have a consistent experience of their expectation that they can research the products, understand the products, and feel confident in buying it.
Yep, great point. And we'll get to those tools in a second. John, any thoughts that you have to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, if I would rephrase your question, I would say I think it's about consistency and engagement. So consistency for the sake of consistency, you can get in a lot of, think of, whatever, big franchise or chain you can think out there. It doesn't mean that it's great. So I think, the path to, and in our business in retail media, where traditional retailers are trying to monetize this traffic, right, and sell advertising to CPG companies so that at the point of purchase, you can actually advertise something, which is probably the most useful way to advertise. But to get there, it can't just be a bunch of noise, right? It's got to be engaging. And that is certainly at Cooler Screens, one of our, philosophies is, a screen for the sake of a screen is sort of useless. It's just noise. You can maybe sell advertising on there, but it doesn't make the consumer experience necessarily any better, and it may make it actually worse. So you've got to think like a traditional merchant would. Merchants wake up thinking about, how do I sell more product? How do I make, better displays? How do I make this more enticing? How do I deal with the adjacencies? So in essence, how do I sell more product in a way that's meaningful and engaging to the consumer? Not how do I sell more advertising, right? Or make things more consistent. So I think there's still a true place for a true merchant in retail that thinks that way, that thinks about the consumer experience being incredibly engaging. And then I think the rest sort of comes along with that. And so that's really our philosophy. That's my philosophy. I think that is what will help retailers not just compete and have a successful omni-channel strategy, but will allow them to sort of win over that customer, because they're not only are they engaging, they're providing useful information, and also they're monetizing their traffic, which is really important for conventional retailers to do, because the online players are doing that. The Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, retail media's got to monetize their traffic and take those dollars away from the traditional e-commerce players in order to really compete and be successful.
Yeah, it's always been a puzzle, right? Like, you have people in the store, you have a captive audience in some ways, and you can improve their share of wallet right there if you're able to communicate to them effectively. But Ricardo, any additional points on this topic of expectations and alignment?
Yeah, I'll come back to the point about consistency. So one of the interesting things I've always found in this sort of discussion and putting new things in a store with a lot of retailers is how you go about testing and trying things out. So many retailers, right, will have a list of test stores that they like to use to try new things. And what I've actually found is most often when you go through those types of pilot exercises, through those predetermined test stores, things turn out great 95% of the time. And part of the reason for that is because you use the same test stores over and over again. So ultimately, the people in those stores are used to being in that kind of test mode environment. So they're adaptable and they've already adapted, but you end up not really learning what do you need to know to deliver that new experience consistently at all your other locations. So what I find often is that the purpose behind those kind of tests is solid, but the execution isn't quite the way it needs to be, because you haven't had enough variety. There's a difference between putting a new experience in your best performing store versus your lowest performing store. You might find that new experience won't have an impact in that top performing store, but it might have a tremendous impact in the lowest performing store, or vice versa. It just depends on the experience. So I think that detailed of how you go about scaling and executing a new experience in a store is often overlooked in the process, because we all get so focused on, we've got this great new innovation, this great, wonderful new thing that we know customers are going to love. And we get a little bit ahead of our skis in the enthusiasm, right, of getting it out there, which sometimes is okay. One of my favorite examples in the pandemic was how many stores rushed out to implement curbside pickup by just planting a pole and a bucket of cement out front and saying, here's my curbside pickup spot, done. And that was great. And, it was necessary at that time. If you were doing it all over again, and like I saw many retailers, you're right, you improved that experience over time and made it better and better. But you have to watch, how you go about doing that to get to the right scale. So I think that's an important piece to consider, is how you're going to scale it across locations to get that consistency.
Yeah, and if I can add one other thing, talking about the scale here, is we're talking about this in all very kind of, colorful language of, experience. Like, how do you measure that, right? And one of the real big challenges.
Just going to bring it up.
Yeah, one of the big things is it's like, we haven't really been able to measure the impact. Most stores think about store traffic, which is almost like your unique visitors at your website, and sales, right? And all the stuff that happens in the store is almost like a black box. And luckily, with computer vision, store analytics like Retail Next, with being able to look at what happens on the shelf and what people kind of click on, which is kind of what we're doing, being able to do more integration with mobile, geofencing, loyalty and tracking, we're starting to actually be able to do the measurement part. So we can go from Ricardo's like, let's prove this out as a concept, to be able to really justify it, in terms of scaling it, not just because of the sales lift in store, but being able to then attribute, that activity when they leave the store to online, to mobile sales and the like. And so it's a really exciting time because we're shining a light on this black box.
Yeah, we're getting questions. So just to the audience, again, I love the engagement in the chat. Please put the questions in the Q&A part so that I can keep track. My eyes are glazing over the amount of questions that's coming in. Just so we talked about like the critical challenges being, what are the expectations? How do you get alignment? How do you get engagement within the stores? Ricardo talked about experimentation and scaling. And then we talked about, Trevor brought up the point of measurement, right? It looks like these are the critical things. Did we miss anything amongst these points that are critical to kind of driving that in-store experience? And we'll talk about the unified version of it in a second. Anything we missed in these points that we just raised?
I think organizational culture is maybe the biggest of all.
Yeah, you have to include the people.
Yeah, and
it's
getting
people plus technology.
Yeah, getting everybody aligned. When you think about technology in retail, it's often the e-commerce people or the supply chain people, right? Because they've been dealing with scale and data and bits, and in-store to date has very much been more art than science. And so there's a cultural transformation that's happening. What's partially interesting is, as you see this kind of latest generation start to retire at the highest levels, there's this huge vacuum of new, digital first talent that is starting to change that culture. But it's a process and going to take a long time.
Yeah. So Trevor, I want to give you kudos for keeping us on track. You just kind of segued into the next section, which is how do we actually address these points? And I'm going to start off throwing the ball back at Andy and Trevor, because both of you in that little trailer video that we had posted with regards to the challenges to retail raised similar points, right? Andy, you talked about consistent holding people accountable, alluding to the culture and having simple, repeatable processes, if I remember correctly. Trevor, you raised the point again of culture and of alignment. So how do we actually get to that, right? It's a very simple question and a point to raise, but what are the actionable steps retailers can take to build a culture that is people first, to quote John, driven by engagement, driven by, and to quote everyone else, experimentation and so forth. I'll keep quiet and I'll let Andy kick things off, and Trevor.
Yeah, so at the Vitamin Shop, we start with who we hire. So it's not just hire random people and teach them our culture. We call our store associates health enthusiasts because we hire people that are health enthusiasts. And I think many retailers really bode well by hiring your customers. And so we hire health enthusiasts, and then we invest time and money to continue on with their education. So they learn all about the products that we sell, whether it's vitamins, minerals, supplements, essential oils, sports nutrition, and it's ongoing. So one of our brand pillars is expertise. And one of the reasons that we give to customers to come into a Vitamin Shoppe store is to have a conversation about whatever, challenge it or, or goals that you have. So starting with hiring the right people and then investing in them is key for us for culture. Specifically around repeatable, and I use the term simple, just, greeting everyone that walks in the store, getting out from behind the cash wrap. So we have a program called 5-star service, and there's a checklist of 5 things. Mm-hmm. And it gets back to measurement. There's ways, you can keep track of that and say, hey, did you do these 5 things on the visit? And that drives the consistency, but also, as someone said so well, consistent, strong, and positive behavior.
Yeah. And I think we go to the stores to interact with, in some ways, not just interact with the products, but to have a good experience with the frontline employees. And they actually have the key to unlock that experience, in my opinion. Trevor, anything to add to this point, since you also raised this issue, and then I'll open it up to the other two.
Honestly, Andy's the right person to ask here, because I'm a technology and startup guy. The largest organizations I've run are in the hundreds and not in the thousands or tens of thousands. What I would say, looking from the outside, is the issues that I see are, one, just a fear of failure, right? So you got to be able to test things quickly. And I find that people are scared to do tests. The tests are too small that they can't get the data at the, like, they'll do a 5-store test and will show 80% sales lift. And they're like, wow, it was only 5 stores. Or to Ricardo's point, oh, it was the flagship stores. It's like, well, then why was that the test, right? And they think that they need to understand how this is going to scale across all their stores from the get-go and spend 6 months thinking about it, versus let's test and learn something about this new technology and how how people interact with it. I think the other piece is that there are a lot of organizations that just have a ton of turnover. Like, there are organizations that flip over teams every 6 months to 12 months, which means if you're in the middle of initiative, every month, 8% of the people are going to leave. And it's really hard to get consistency without complete senior level leadership, because everybody's churning underneath all the time. Yeah. And I think it's just a very difficult environment until you change some of those dynamics.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was actually going to pose a question to Andy. How do you retain people and how do you scale up? So great points, Trevor. Maybe, but John, you got some retail experience, a lot of retail experience. So do you have anything to add to this point, particularly in the present world of retention being difficult and getting alignment between senior management and the frontline employees?
Yeah, no question about it. I think Andy mentioned the word simplicity, I believe. I think that is that's really important. And I used to get this question all of the time at Trader Joe's, is how do you hire such great people? And the answer is really about how do you make everybody's job easy so that they can engage with the customer. That's really the key. And someone very wise once said, anybody can come up with a complex, really smart, complex idea. It takes a genius to come up with something that's really simple and easy to execute. And so I would challenge everybody on this call to sort of dig down into the next layer of, when you have a good idea and a good thought, how do you continue to bring that down to the most sort of common denominator, so that as a retailer, you only have to press 1 or 2 buttons to get something done, instead of offering out there a flavor of the month or 20, 30 different initiatives that nobody can follow, right? And so I think making there are thousands of employees out there, right, for even a mid-sized retailer. And so finding ways to make their jobs easy, declutter their minds so that they can properly engage with the 2 most important things in the store. One is your customers and the other one is your products. And so the most important question I think to ask a candidate is, A, do you like people, right? and B, do you like the products that we're selling? If you get those two things and you do your job well as a senior team or as a strategist in a business, and simplify their job so that they can actually focus on customers and they can actually focus on the product instead of 20 different audits and different ways to measure performance and all of that stuff. I think keeping it simple is really the key, I think, to in-store success. You got to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes from a supply chain standpoint, and in every other way, pick the right locations. Everything else matters too. But in terms of leading teams, those are the two most important things that I would focus on.
Ricardo, before I get to your point, let me just go back to Andy, right? How do you keep it simple? It's a simple idea, but do you have like a secret sauce since everyone is piggybacked off of that idea? What's the secret to having worked a little bit in retail? It's not that simple to keep it simple,
No, I think if you look in the chat, right, people talk about how hard it is. And John said that, well, I used to work for years at Pier 1 Imports. And one thing we had this was called 100% greet. And it was just to focus on making sure that you said hello to everyone that walked in the store. That's such an easy thing, but just making that a focus as a beginning. Let's just, welcome our guests into our store. Then, once we got that, then we moved on to let's ask an open-ended question. What brought you in here? So now you walk into a store. Hey, thanks for coming. Welcome. What is it? What are you working on? What's your project? What are you looking for? That. So you can build from those things. And it's just saying hi to someone sounds so simple. I shouldn't even bring it up, but it made a difference, right? It mattered.
Yeah. It's about enforcing that, not enforcing, probably not the right word, but to distributing that perspective across to the front lines and making sure everyone aligns with it. Ricardo, any last thoughts on this point before we change gears?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add, because there have been so many good points here, that everyone's kind of touched on this idea that in order to enable all of the people in the store, right, to do all the things that you want them to do and to do it in the best way possible, right, the technology that's surrounding them in many cases, right, has to be seamless, right? So we've talked a lot, everyone's mentioned keeping it simple. Well, one of the ways you do that, right, is to only expose the technology when it needs to be exposed, right? You don't just have technology in the store for the sake of technology. And, you asked Gautam about how do you accomplish it. I think one important piece too is that it's not just, who you have on the project, but, you're always sourcing technology from a solution provider of some kind. And you want to be sure that, the ones you choose to work with, right, are able to support you and how you want it implemented and how you want to put that in the store, whether that means, you are being careful about choosing which system integrator you're going to work with, or looking at evaluating multiple technology providers for a certain solution set that you want. Part of your evaluation is how is that organization going to work with you during the deployment phase, right? They're not just going to sell you something and then hope for the best, because hope isn't a strategy in that case, right? It's more about how are they going to help you throughout the entire implementation. And then when it's done, how are they going to continue to support you? Because it's not really done when it's in place, right? Because now you have store teams using the technology and you're going to get feedback that you didn't get when you were rolling it out. That's going to change over time. And you need to have that line of communication with your solution providers and integrators continually going so you can go back and keep iterating and making things better and more seamless.
Yeah, excellent point. And, wrapping things up, I always tell my students, right, it's EX leads to CX, which leads to RX. And it looks like you are all saying the same thing. So thank you for validating what I preach in class. That's always a good thing to do. Now switching gears a little bit, John, you had in our little video teaser talked about how to modernize, right, the tech and to speak to the hearts and minds of the customer. Ricardo, you talked about, and you just talked about technology as well. And Trevor, you have spoken about it too. So let's just shift gears and talk about how technology and analytics can actually play an important role in driving not just consistent shopper experience, but that engagement that John, you were talking so much about. And here I'm going to let John kind of kick things off, since you did bring up the point of engagement and how technology can play a role. And then we'll go around the room.
Yeah, you bet. I think at Cooler Screens, we call that hearts and minds. And it's very much in the sense of, if you grow up as a merchant, you realize that the job is part art and part science. It's not really just all about science. You've got to, there are ways to, there is intuition. And there is a way to make customers feel a certain way when they're in the store by the things that you buy and where you place them. And so I think when we think about our content, we want to take the best of online commerce. We want to take product attributes and show those to customers so that they can make better decisions. We want to use the screens for just all of the efficiencies that they bring when you shift from analog to real-time digital displays, to be able to change prices and content at a moment's notice instead of printing and shipping things around. So that's the science part of it. But then from an art standpoint, how do you make a customer smile when they're walking through the door? Using technology to do that, right? We all know that you got to have great, employees in place that feel good about where they work and their leadership. But you can use technology to make people smile. Just think of what you see on television or the movies on your screens, the things that make you smile versus the ones that don't. And so I think that as we continue to evolve our content, it's not just about the product and the attributes and all of the information that customers need to make good information, but how do you do that in a way that's playful, if that's what the retailer wants? And so I think that's really the next level, if you will, is surprise the customer with something that they were not expecting. Whether it's I like to use the example of the Coke ad where you see the polar bear sort of fighting over the Coke during the holiday time, right? So imagine seeing that in a store on 6-foot displays, and what that does to sort of a child's view of sort of what a product might be. And so there's so much opportunity to do that with technology nowadays. And I think that's where retailers ultimately will start to shift to is, yes, make our world more profitable, more efficient, easier to manage, but then also make it delightful, surprise our customers, and aside from also informing them.
Excellent points.
Hey, John, I love that idea. I just question you, with cooler screens, you guys have, I believe, front-facing cameras that do demographic detection and sentiment analysis?
No. So all of our sensors are identity blind. So we actually have a privacy by design philosophy. And this really works toward our advantage because so much of the cookieless world and environment where, consumers don't want you to know who they are. So we're 100% privacy by design. Those are basically sensors that track how many customers are walking there. And that's the way that retailer monetizes traffic, because you can say, hey, you just saw 30 million people across the Walgreens channel, but absolutely does not tap into who the customer actually is, any demographic data whatsoever.
Got it.
It's
Got
just
it.
an actual.
The reason
sensor.
I ask is I actually think all the privacy concerns with cameras can be addressed just through anonymization. And so we are doing kind of the ability to do front-facing camera with traffic and demographic segmentation, but also sentiment analysis. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is like measuring, like, can you measure number of smiles generated during retail, right? Like if you think of if as a technology company or an experience company, you measure that, like thinking through how you get from John's concept of thinking about delightfulness, joy, and then getting to, well, how do we actually measure this, improve it over the long term? The interesting thing is their technology's there. John points out some privacy issues that do definitely need to be addressed. But I think there's a world where we can do that. And I think it's exciting.
I agree. I mean, if you are able to get engagement, well, one, privacy is critical, right? So figuring out, we know that there are these privacy laws that are coming our way. How do we balance that thing, which is a question. So hang tight, we're not done discussing that, but right now I just want to get
you've got a whole different session there for that.
Yeah, I know.
That could be another hour-long
I'm going to try and keep chugging along and keep us on point here.
Shortcut answer for us at Cooler Screens is it's ultimately sales. If what we're doing works, it'll result in more sales of the product that we're engaged with. That's how we get around that view, and we'll hold ourselves with the retailer to that standard is, hey, forget about the retail media thing for a second. Is what we're doing growing your sales? Is it adding value? And then we can talk about attribution and all of that stuff. But I think that it's a great topic, and it's a what what can you do versus what should you do, and what are you allowed to do through you have permission of the consumer. That we all struggle with that. And
that's a great point. Any other thoughts on the technologies and role of analytics, in trying to drive engagement and, as John said, driving lift?
Yeah,
and as Trevor said, driving emotions, it looks like.
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, I think John is right. Like, we all hang all our technology vendors, like, we hang our hat on sales lift. If you go to perchinteractive.com, right at the top, you'll see 30 to 180% sales lift, and like that's ultimately how we get judged. But what we're finding to be interesting is all the analytics on the way that can let you iterate to get to that lift, right? So when I ask retailers where on the planogram, which is like, where on the shelves do you put your products? Everyone says eye level. Well, on an end cap, that turns out not to be true. It turns out that the edges are more valuable than eye level. And yet 100 out of 100 people will say eye level. And I use that as an example because ultimately a lot of these kind of micro interactions that happen in store, we just don't have the data on, which means we're not merchandising the products optimally. We can look at a pickup to sales conversion ratio of every product on the shelf. Yes, the sales is low, but why? People are interested in it. They're picking it up. Is it pricing? Is it packaging? Is it promotion? Did the promotion really move the needle or not? I saw something about, does something like in-store only discounts work for shoppers? Like, how would you test that? Like, you can just look at the sales at the bottom, but all the steps, everything that we do on e-commerce, like, what did they click on? When they clicked on it, did they add it to cart? Which content changed the way they behave? None of that has really been available to us until we're really just starting to kind of scratch the surface. And so I'm personally excited about analytics because I think it's going to shine a light that not only are we merchandising the products on the shelves suboptimally, right? We're doing a lot suboptimally. And whereas like e-commerce is fun and just technology, I think it's going to be iterative improvement. When we shine data into the store, we're going to see disruptive, revolutionary improvement in the way we think about stores and roll out these programs.
Fantastic. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Andy, you have something to add?
Yeah, just one last comment from me on the in-store technology. I just think it's so important that whatever we put in our stores is something that you can't do better at home, right? People are getting in their car, especially a store like ours, it's a destination. So, I've seen retailers stick up a screen with their website. I think that's a really bad idea, right? So it better be unique, and there needs to be a reason to get people to come and to interact with that tech.
That's a fantastic point, right? You've already made the investment to come to the store, and you need to get something that you don't get when you're at home. Fantastic point. Ricardo, why don't you bring us home on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just kind of building on what Andy just said, right? Each channel has a purpose, right? Every sales channel you have to engage a customer ultimately has a purpose to drive that customer into that channel. Your goal in the past may have been to get them to convert in that channel, where now I think I would argue the goal is to get them to experience as many as possible, or however many it may take for a given customer to convert. You don't have to worry about was it just one channel versus two. You just want to get them to the sale. But when you have them in store, and I think this is what Trevor has brought up a few times already, right? How do you know what's working and what's not? When we talk about other digital channels, there are a nearly infinite number of ways that things get measured, right? And mountains of data that get gathered to help you understand what's working and what's not working with a customer. There's all sorts of different ways you can do A/B testing in the digital space. What do you do in store? And I think that's where the analytics really comes in through multiple sources, whether we're talking about cameras and computer vision, whether we're talking about, going back a few years when we all started talking about this around Wi-Fi analytics, to sensor-based things that we can do using IoT now, all these kinds of devices and things that help generate in-store data to let you know how long did a customer stand in front of a display, to help you answer what was it about that display versus the one 3 feet to their right that caused them to stand 10 seconds longer in that display. If you rearrange the merchandise, are you going to produce a different outcome in that dwell time, and then map that to sales so that you know exactly what did you do that generated that sale once the customer's in the store. And that's what these technologies help accomplish now in a measurable way.
Yeah, and I was just at the Retail Next executive conference last week, and one of the conversations was around digital screens. Like, do they change the traffic flow? and no one knows, right? But now with Retail Next, we can actually look. And, so many retailers I talked to were like, oh, we should test that. I'm like, great, right? And what's interesting is it's now a combination of technologies, right? It's Retail Next, it's the point of sale data, it's the digital signs or the mobile or the electronic shelf labels, whatever it is. The pieces are starting to come together for us to really meaningfully measure not just the sales that's the end product, but the individual steps in the way. And that will allow us to identify like, hey, like if we just tweak this thing, we can get there. Whereas often a trial might fail to reach that sales lift because of some dynamic in the middle that we can't see. And then we get this test bench of being able to change knobs and dials and test just like A/B testing online. And that's what's going to open this all up in my mind.
So just kind of wrapping this segment up very quickly, since I saw we're 15 minutes into calling it an evening, is that it looks like the holy grail is to try and in some ways mimic the online version where we get more micro level data to enable a superior shopper experience. But to Andy's point, you're bringing them in, that experience should be very unique because you've already made the way to the store. And to John's point, it's about while still respecting privacy, which in his world means it ties directly to sales and you don't need anonymity of the data. And then tying it all together was Trevor and Ricardo's point of experimentation being fundamental to this whole thing. Now, just flipping, since we have 4 really unique individuals together in the room and we have only 10 minutes left, flipping it to the last section, right? So we talked about the importance of people, we talked about the importance of processes, and we've talked about the importance of technology. Where are we seeing these things going? Where are we seeing in-store shoppers? Put on your forward-thinking hat, and if you don't mind, just talk about the emerging trends in in-store shopper experiences. And I'll again try to hit the retailers first before we wrap it up with the solutions. So Andy and John, do you want to kind of talk about where you think, what you think are the trends?
I think everything Trevor said around things that we have in digital coming to life in the store, from being able to click through things or see things. I mean, I'm 100% on board that we already know what to do. It's just a matter of using the right tech to drive in, to really analyze what's going on.
Yeah, if you look at a couple of the biggest challenges retailers are facing, labor, not just scarcity of labor, but cost of labor is not going down, right? If any, it's going up, and it's going up significantly. So finding ways to be more efficient and get your sales per labor hour higher, I think is important. Supply chain costs as a whole, logistics are going up, as well as cost of materials are going up, raw materials. So all of that leads to higher cost. The retailer cannot pass it all on. A couple, 2-3 years ago, this is as a retailer, you try to find ways to lower your cost of doing business through logistics and supply chain and technology. That was 3 years ago, sort of pre-COVID. And then you had this COVID experience that everybody just said, let's just focus on COVID and dealing with all of that. And now you've got sort of, as we unwind from that, hopefully, you've got that you still are trying to find ways to improve your technology to compete with the big companies like Walmart and Amazon to lower your cost of doing business. But now on top of that, you've got labor rates spiking and labor shortages spiking. So all of that means the retailer needs to be smarter, much more efficient, find ways to engage with their customers with all of those challenges and still survive. Rents are not going down, right? Cost of business in general is not going down. And so in order to survive, you got to not just make it more engaging, but you have to find other sources of income, right? So what are those other sources of income outside of sales, indirect sources of income, like advertising income, monetizing your traffic, and finding ways to be more efficient? I think that's the future of retail. And I think to a point Trevor's made consistently around data is, the big companies like Amazon and Facebook and Google are hogging all the great data scientists. And if there's anything that we need, just 5 years, 10 years ago in retail, there were the retail pricing people, that nobody knew who they reported to, but they understood trends and they were, worked for buyers or worked for the merchandising team. I see the emergence of data people as business people, a requirement for retailers, so that they can actually be part of the strategy and the decision-making process. We're all looking to hire them. And I think that trade by itself is super important for the future of retailers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trevor, Ricardo?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback, John, on your point there, which is like, a lot of people don't realize the business model of retail, right? So if you're a multi-brand retailer, the brands spend about $20 billion a year helping to pay these trade dollars to help promote their products and promote your stores. So if you spend, if Walmart agrees to buy $1 million worth of your product, something like, $200,000 extra has to go to promote that product at Walmart, right? And so the store is really almost like a media platform, which is what John was hitting on, right? And to promote your products. And in the future, you're going to be able to provide, retailers will be able to provide data such as, how many people saw your product, even if they didn't buy it? How did they react to it? When they picked it up, did they buy it? Which content worked or didn't work? For example, like even pricing and packaging, right? So at Macy's, we did a fragrance bar and we showed that fragrances with ornate bottles, like Carolina Herrera, which is like this high-heeled stiletto shoe, converted from pickup to sale at a 22% greater rate, right? And so now you can go to the other people and say, hey, you got a plain bottle. You should spend $7 to get 22% conversion rate. And so there's some business models looking at this, Showfields, Neighborhood Goods, Outdoor Voices, and some others that are basically allowing brands to kind of feature their products and then say, here's what worked, what didn't work. This is what the pop-ups are all about. And when retailers get on that train and decide that their data isn't like so proprietary and special and like they have to hold it close to their vest, and they open that up, they're going to find that there's going to be a lot of money spent to try and figure out, from brands, how do I market in the real world where profitability is generated? And I think that's the store as media concept, taking that to that next extension followed with data is going to be extraordinarily powerful.
Great. Yeah, fully agree. Ricardo, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion, which is it's all about the data. Sure. It's more of a function, when you ask about what are the emerging technologies that are going to be powering those trends, ultimately they're all means to an end to generate more data, but the data that you're going to use to derive some really meaningful insights about your customers, about products, and Trevor's example about, using that data to determine that, maybe a product design change is relevant. It's finding new ways, right, to leverage that data, both internally and externally. I think that's going to be one of the things that we see is maybe the greatest trend that emerges from all these other technologies that we've talked about. And I saw in the chat stream, a lot of folks asking about 5G in retail. And we haven't talked about that one, but that's another one that can be pretty transformative. But again, why? Because it's going to be used as a means to generate even more data. So in some ways, I'm going to come full circle to what John said earlier about needing more data science experts in your staff, and why the competition for those people is going to get even stronger. Because it's one thing to generate the data, but it's another to actually get good utility out of it and derive the right kind of insights. Because you can get lots of solutions will give you insights, but can you act on them is really what matters. You have a means to act on those insights in a way that's going to increase revenue, increase conversion, result in better margins, and so on. So it really comes down to how are you maximizing the value of your data?
Yeah. If I may add, right, like data is the currency that also empowers the frontline employees to provide that really engaging experience and actually add value to that shopper experience. No debate on data being the currency, and also clearly the challenges balancing that data need with the privacy concerns that people have, educating people on what are the challenges. What we have a few more minutes and there's a whole bunch of questions. So I thought I'll take those last few minutes to kind of get some answers to these questions. We'll keep it brief and I'm going to summarize it, right? There's a sequence of questions that talks about technologies that could drive store profitability, like whether be it AR, VR, be it the metaverse, and other things, right? So can you just quickly, I'm not going to call on anyone, who wants to go first, just talk and keep it really short about what are these emerging technologies and what's your perspective on them, right? Metaverse, AR, it's been around for a long time, still to see it's growing, still yet to see complete adoption. What's your thoughts, and what are the other emerging technologies that one needs to keep aware of to drive store profitability?
All right.
Happy to
Go,
Go ahead,
John,
Trey.
go. I've talked too much.
I think that, self-checkout is still a big one. You see it in a lot of retailers, but it's still not, people are, even Amazon's still trying to figure it out, right? And so how do you sort of free the customer so that they can walk and get what they want and be charged for it? I think that is a key a key pressure that retailers feel, that I think technology and including Microsoft, I think so many great tech players out there are trying to figure that out. I think that it will be transformative, and we're probably scratching the surface right now, scanning our own items, and we'll look upon that probably 10 years from now and say, do you remember when we used to scan our own items? Sort of like when I tell my kids that, do you remember when someone used to pump the gas for you when you drove into the gas station? And so there'll be a way to do that where you could just walk out. And I think that will be a big windfall for retailers and also for the customer experience.
Yeah, fantastic. So checkout and the frictions around checkout.
I would say a subset of that, or actually a superset of that, which is computer vision, right? How is cashierless checkout working? Computer vision. How is augmented reality so that I can see prices and everything and interact with stuff and with glasses? Computer vision. So if you think about it, the store is a physical place that we haven't been able to see into. Computer vision is allowing us to see into the physical world in all these ways. Robots that go by, I saw Simba Technologies on here, like that look, oh, this item's out of stock, or even a camera saying the moment that something's out of stock, go replenish it. All of it is about, it starts with seeing the world as it is, and that's computer vision. And so that to me is the answer to most of these questions, but ends up being cashless checkout, augmented reality, planogram enforcement, et cetera.
So for me, it's the back of the house stuff. It's using AI to be in stock better. It's using AI to build a schedule that works for the employee and for the store and for the customer. It's using AI to figure out what time the truck should show up and things like that. So it's, and John touched on, it's just about efficiency so we can free up our store associates to interact with the customer.
And maybe if I may add to that, it's not just AI, but it's also automation, right? We're seeing a tremendous growth in automation right now, and I don't see that tide turning anytime. I think we're up, it's just going to escalate from moving forward. So combining AI with automation, I think will really...
if a store cancels a buy online, pick up in store because of out of stock, do you automatically update your inventory, right? It's such a simple thing. But if you don't, the next customer and the next customer and the next customer, you promise that item that's not there.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I think these are all great operational things that we're really hitting on, whether to Andy's point, it's back of house, and it's how AI can help make these processes more efficient, more accurate. It's, how you enable the store staff to be more efficient, and by extension, it's more efficient at the more mundane tasks. They're probably being more productive at the customer facing tasks at the same time. So finding ways to use the technology, in automation, Gotham Right is, I think, a super important one there, to make things operationally more efficient and more productive. That's really going to be the key. So, pre-pandemic, we all sat around these webinars talking about creating experiential retail. I think now we're all tend to talk more about how are we using those same technologies that we used to reference about building this fantastic, where the technology is almost in your face to create an experience. Now we're talking about how can we improve operations, add measurement capability, generate more useful data, and then to John's earlier point, take all of those things and create more opportunities for monetization for the retailer's business. I think that's where this all comes together.
Yeah. Well, we're at time. I've always say that the fundamentals of retail, right? Convenience, cost, adding value still remain the same. How you deliver them today in the post-pandemic world has changed a lot, because you rely now on data, you rely on technology, you rely on your employees in a lot more creative way. So with that, we'll come to the end of the session exactly on the hour. I want to thank all the panelists for taking time and for sharing your very valuable insights. To the audience, fantastic chat. I could not keep up. I'm sorry we couldn't get to some of the questions. We'll have the recording posted in about a week or so. By Monday or Tuesday, we should have the recording posted for your consumption. There's questions about metaverse. We have some panels previously who actually talk about this. And we've got a lot of ideas for future sessions. So thank you all for sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you next